Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, wind tearing through your hair, heart pounding not from fear, but expectation. Below, a vast chasm stretches into shadow, its depths unknown. You know only one thing: stepping forward will change everything. Not because you might fall, but because remaining still means never discovering what lies beyond. This is the human condition, not falling but choosing to move when falling seems easier, safer, more certain. And yet, most never take the leap. Why do you stay bound to the familiar when every cell in your body screams for something more? Why does fear feel safer than freedom? You build elaborate identities around comfort zones shaped like cages, routines that make life predictable, relationships that dull desire, ambitions reduced to daydreams whispered before sleep. But inside, beneath the layers of rationalization, there's a quiet ache, a knowing. That real living, the kind that makes you tremble with awe and terror, begins only after fear has been faced, not avoided. Consider this paradox: safety kills. Not literally, perhaps, but spiritually. Societies have perfected the art of pacifying the soul, offering distraction after distraction, numbing the discomfort of uncertainty with a steady stream of curated experiences, synthetic highs, and algorithm-fed affirmations. But ask yourself, how many dreams have died quietly behind closed doors because they were too terrifying to chase? How many lives have been lived as if on mute, their owners too afraid to turn up the volume? You are told that courage is rare, heroic, a trait reserved for warriors and revolutionaries. But what if courage is simply the refusal to let fear dictate the shape of your life? What if the greatest danger isn't failure or loss, but stagnation? What if the very thing you fear, chaos, vulnerability, uncertainty, is the only gateway to true growth? Think of your fears as locked doors. Behind each one is a version of yourself waiting to be born. But you keep walking past them, pretending the keys don't exist. What if those keys were always in your hands, and you just forgot how to use them? And here's the deeper question. If you could step beyond all fear right now, what would you finally begin? Would it be a dream buried beneath years of self-doubt? A relationship you've longed to confront or finally walk away from? A truth about yourself you've refused to speak aloud, even in solitude? Or perhaps simply the act of being fully present in a world so desperate to distract you? The irony is that fear, in its purest form, is not your enemy. It is your compass. It points to what matters. Every time your breath tightens, every time your pulse quickens at the thought of an action unacted upon, that is not a signal to retreat. It is a whisper from the deepest part of you, urging you to move forward. But why then do we listen to it as if it were warning us away? What if the entire construct of fear has been manipulated by society, by culture, by generations who preferred control over chaos, certainty over wonder? What if fear was never meant to protect you, but to limit you? To answer that, we must first understand where fear truly comes from, and how it became the invisible architect of your life. Fear did not arrive fully formed. It learned to wear masks. First, it dressed itself in morality. This is wrong, you were taught, not because it was harmful, but because it defied structure. Then, it borrowed logic. That won't work. You're not ready. People will laugh. These were never facts. They were fear's new voice, disguised as reason. Psychologists call this cognitive distortion. Philosophers call it existential avoidance. Whatever name you give it, the mechanism remains the same. Fear convinces you that safety is salvation. But safety, when pursued without questioning, becomes suffocation. Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, once wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." He understood that fear arises not only from danger, but from possibility, from the terrifying realization that you are the author of your own fate. In a world where choice is infinite and consequence inevitable, anxiety becomes the mind's way of coping with responsibility. Your fear is not of failure, it is of becoming the architect of your own downfall, or worse, your own greatness. Carl Jung saw fear as a shadow, a repressed part of the psyche that grows stronger the more you ignore it. He warned that until you confront your darkness, it would continue to pull your strings from behind the curtain. Fear, then, is not just an emotion, It is a defense mechanism against the full expression of self. It keeps you small, manageable, palatable, to others and to yourself. Religions codified this instinct millennia ago. They built temples around obedience, made virtues out of submission, and called restraint holiness. Society followed suit, trading freedom for order, spontaneity for stability. You grew up hearing that discipline was superior to passion, that patience was better than impulse, that caution was nobler than recklessness. But what if these were not truths, but tools of control? Neuroscience confirms what philosophy has long suspected. The brain is wired to seek safety above all else. The amygdala, that ancient sentinel at the gate of consciousness, fires off alarms long before the prefrontal cortex can process reality. Survival comes first, exploration second. Pain avoidance dominates pleasure seeking. And so, evolutionarily speaking, you are designed to shrink away from risk, even when the reward is meaning itself. But evolution is not destiny. You are not merely a survival machine, you are a meaning-making machine. Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in Auschwitz, observed that those who found purpose were more likely to endure unimaginable suffering. Fear, he realized, lost its grip when replaced by a sense of significance. When death was no longer the worst possible outcome, people rose to defy it. Yet modern civilization has inverted this equation. Meaning is optional. Comfort is mandatory. You are encouraged to avoid pain at all costs, even emotional pain. Therapy is marketed as a tool for feeling good, not for confronting the raw edges of existence. Entire industries profit from keeping you in a state of low-grade dissatisfaction, promising relief through consumption, validation, or escape. You live in a world that prizes productivity over presence, efficiency over depth, and outcomes over experience. And so, fear adapts. It no longer shouts its warnings, it whispers them. It tells you that you need permission, that you need proof, that you need certainty before you act. And in doing so, it ensures you never do anything at all. Because the moment you take action without guarantees, fear loses its power. The moment you embrace the unknown, the illusion shatters. You realize that the cliff wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. But few ever take it, because society has taught you that fear is protection, not prison. And breaking free means daring to believe that the world beyond fear is not destruction, but creation. Let's go deeper. Let's peel back the surface and examine the unseen consequences of letting fear govern your choices. Because fear doesn't just limit what you do, it shapes who you become. It sculpts your identity like water carving stone, slowly eroding ambition, desire, and authenticity, until nothing remains but a polished shell of compliance. Cognitive biases conspire with fear to maintain this illusion. Confirmation bias leads you to seek evidence reinforcing your limitations. You see setbacks as proof that you weren't meant to try. Loss aversion convinces you that clinging to what you have is more valuable than risking what you could gain. Self-serving bias lets you blame external forces for your failures while withholding credit for your successes. Each of these mental shortcuts reinforces the cage, making escape seem irrational, even dangerous. Neurologically, chronic fear rewires the brain. Stress hormones flood your system, shrinking the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and learning. Dopamine pathways grow accustomed to small, safe rewards, dulling the appetite for greater fulfillment. Over time, complacency feels less like surrender and more like security. You forget that you once dreamed of flying. Cultural conditioning compounds the effect. From childhood, you were taught to obey before you questioned, to perform before you explored, to conform before you created. Parents feared your failure, schools punished deviation, and media sold you versions of success that had nothing to do with joy. You internalized the message: play it safe, stay within bounds, and happiness will follow. It didn't. Instead, you settled. For jobs that drained you, relationships that left you empty, lives that played out like scripts written by someone else. And the more you conformed, the more you believed that this was life, that freedom was an illusion, that risk was foolishness, that true contentment came only through hardship endured rather than adventure embraced. But what if none of this was necessary? What if the fear was never yours to begin with, but inherited, imposed, weaponized, History is littered with examples of societies that thrived not through obedience, but rebellion. The Renaissance emerged not by preserving tradition, but by challenging it. Scientific breakthroughs occurred not in moments of certainty, but in daring hypotheses. Revolutionaries didn't wait for permission. They acted, often at great personal cost, and in doing so, reshaped the world. Yet today, you are told to plan instead of explore, to calculate instead of create, to prepare instead of leap. You are trained to believe that success is linear, that progress follows a path laid out by others. But life is not a road, it is a wilderness. And the ones who thrive are not those who follow maps drawn by strangers, but those who dare to chart their own course. When you allow fear to dictate your boundaries, you lose more than opportunity. You lose selfhood. You become a reflection of expectations, a performer in someone else's story. You trade autonomy for approval, originality for acceptance, truth for tolerance. And the tragedy is that you often don't even notice, until one day you stand before a mirror and realize that the person staring back is a stranger. Someone shaped not by passion or purpose, but by compromise and caution. Someone who has spent a lifetime avoiding failure, and in doing so, avoided life itself. This is the silent theft of fear, not violence, not catastrophe, just slow erosion, the quiet disappearance of potential, the fading of dreams into background noise, the loss of what could have been, unnoticed because you stopped believing in it long ago. How many stories have gone untold because the teller convinced themselves no one would listen? How many artists never picked up a brush because they feared ridicule? How many lovers never confessed their hearts because they imagined rejection? Fear operates in silence, which is why it's so powerful. It doesn't need to scream to dominate. It only needs to whisper. But what if you finally decided to stop listening? Breaking free begins with recognition, not rebellion, not resistance, but awareness. The first step is seeing the architecture of your fear, naming it, understanding its origins, recognizing that much of what you've accepted as wisdom is actually limitation disguised as advice. Start by asking the forbidden question, what if everything you feared never happened? Your mind will immediately protest. It will offer 1,000 hypothetical disasters. But stop. Look closer. How many of those fears have already come to pass? How many times have you predicted catastrophe and nothing happened? How many times have you survived the very things you dreaded? Now ask another question. What if the fear itself is the problem, not what you fear? Fear is not a warning sign. It is a wall. One you've spent your life building brick by psychological brick, convinced it protected you. But walls don't just keep threats out, they imprison you inside. True freedom begins the moment you stop treating fear as authority and start treating it as information. Consider the Stoics. Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. They didn't deny fear. They studied it. They walked alongside it. They asked, what is the worst that can happen? And then answered honestly, realizing that even the worst-case scenario was survivable. Death, rejection, failure, embarrassment. These were not ends. They were transitions. Or look at Lao Tzu, who taught that sometimes the only way forward is through apparent weakness. That strength lies in yielding, in flowing with resistance rather than fighting it. If you stop resisting fear, if you let it move through you like a river instead of damming it, you rob it of its hold. Even science agrees. Exposure therapy, the gold standard for overcoming phobias and anxiety disorders, works precisely because it teaches the brain that fear is not synonymous with danger. The more you face what you fear, the less power it holds. Neural pathways shift, hormone levels balance. The body learns that survival does not require paralysis. So how do you apply this to life? Begin small, choose one fear and confront it. Not with force, but with curiosity. Ask, what happens if I do this thing I fear? Then find out. Speak the truth you've been hiding. Send that email. Say no. Say yes. Walk into the room alone. Share your idea. Risk the embarrassment. Feel the shame. Watch it fade. Because shame, like fear, only survives in secrecy. The key is not to eliminate fear, but to redefine your relationship with it. To stop seeing it as a barrier and start seeing it as a threshold. Many have done it before you. Malcolm X transformed fear into conviction. Maya Angelou turned fear into poetry. Elon Musk faced the financial collapse of his companies and kept going. Marie Curie walked into laboratories where no woman belonged and discovered rays no one knew existed. Their common thread? They did not wait for fear to vanish before acting. They moved with it. They understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And here's the final secret. The more you act, the smaller fear becomes. It shrinks under the weight of your choices. Each time you choose movement over hesitation, expansion over contraction, creation over preservation, you reclaim a piece of yourself that fear had stolen. Eventually, you reach a point where fear no longer dictates your direction, where you no longer ask, "What if I fail?" but instead ask, "What if I don't try?" And that is where the real magic begins. Because when you stop fearing failure, you unlock the single most powerful force in human development: iteration. Failure becomes feedback, setbacks become stepping stones, mistakes become lessons, progress replaces perfection, action becomes identity, and suddenly, you are not someone who avoids fear, you are someone who transcends it. Which brings us to the final, most powerful realization. Here it is, the revelation that changes everything. Fear does not protect you. It hides you, not from danger, not from pain, not from failure, from yourself. Fear is not a shield, it is a mirror, and looking into it reveals the truth you've spent a lifetime avoiding, that the only thing holding you back is you. Not your past, not your trauma, not your circumstances. Those are obstacles, yes, but not insurmountable ones. The real barrier is the belief that you cannot overcome them, that you are not enough, that the world is too big, the odds too stacked, the risks too great. But what if that belief is false? What if the world is not hostile, but hungry for your contribution? What if the universe does not punish boldness but rewards it? What if the only reason you haven't succeeded is because you haven't truly tried? Every myth, every legend, every hero's journey contains the same arc. The protagonist stands at the threshold of the unknown, afraid. Then, something shifts. They cross the line. They face the beast. They enter the cave. And in doing so, they discover a power they never knew they possessed. This is not fiction. This is your life. The only difference between those who change the world and those who watch it change is the willingness to embrace fear, not as enemy, but as ally. Because here's the paradox. The more you face what you fear, the more you begin to trust yourself. The more you trust yourself, the more capable you become. And the more capable you become, the less you need external validation. You stop seeking permission. You stop waiting for certainty. You stop measuring yourself against other people's timelines. You start living according to your own rhythm. And that is the birth of autonomy. You begin to realize that life doesn't begin when conditions are perfect. Life doesn't wait for confidence, clarity, or consensus. Life begins the moment you stop letting fear decide what you can and cannot do. Life begins where fear ends. Not in its absence, but in its transcendence. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the choice to move forward anyway. And once you've made that choice once, you'll make it again. And again. Until one day, you look back and realize you haven't felt fear in weeks, months, years. Not because it disappeared, because you stopped paying attention to it. Because you started paying attention to you, to your vision, to your voice, to your purpose, to the fire inside that refuses to be extinguished. And in that fire, in that fierce, unrelenting spark, you finally understand. Fear was never trying to save you. It was trying to silence you. And now, you've chosen to speak.